Call the meeting to order, please. This is the Village of Riverside's Board of Trustees regular meeting for Thursday, August 2nd, 2018. The time is 7 p.m. Please call the roll.
President Sells.
Here.
Trustee Pollock.
Here.
Trustee Giza.
Here.
Trustee Valerie.
Here.
Trustee Sedemy.
Here.
Village Manager Francis.
Here.
Village Attorney Molina.
Here.
Also present, Village Clerk Haley, and joining us by teleconference is Trustee Peters.
Trustee Peters, are you with us?
Here.
Thank you.
Here.
If you'll please rise for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Trustee Peters, I hope you had a flag in your room there when you're doing that. First up tonight are presentations and public comment. If you would like to make a comment to the board at any time, I ask that you just be recognized by the president and you make your comment from the podium so that the folks at home can hear and see what you have to say. First up is the Police Department recognition of Explorer Post 390. Chief Weitzel.
Good evening, President, Trustees, and Manager Francis. I am honored to have Officer Brian Greenewald, our officer in charge, and at least two of his explorers with us tonight. Brian is going to brief you on the Police Explorer National Conference / competition that took place in West Lafayette, Indiana at Purdue University, which was a little easier to get to. I think last year it was in Arizona, right? That was a long drive. This one wasn't so much, and he brought two of his explorers. Some of the kids have a very busy summer schedule, and some are actually on vacations with their families right now. So those that could make it are here, and I'd ask Brian to brief the board on the competition.
Good evening. 6 Riverside Police Explorers and myself and Joe Metcalf Reyes, who's one of our firemen and used to be an explorer with us and is now an advisor, traveled last month to Purdue University. We spent a week. We got there Monday afternoon and came back late Friday night. It's the National Law Enforcement Exploring Conference. It's hosted every other year by a university around the country. As Chief mentioned, 2 years ago was in Flagstaff. This 2-hour drive sure beat that 26-hour drive. But it's a great week. It is really a unique opportunity for our kids. They got to go to seminars hosted by the Customs and Border Patrol, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. They got to compete in competitions hosted by the Indiana State Police and the ATF. They got to compete in bike policing. I have Quinn Robertson with me. He took 3rd place in his age bracket for bike policing. There were 601 competitors in that, so pretty impressive that he would place in that. But it is a very unique opportunity. I tell them that there really is no way that they would be able to spend a week talking to agents of the FBI, the CIA, the ATF, Customs and Border, if it wasn't for exploring. So, you know, we're fortunate that the village allows us to have a post and that we're allowed to attend these conferences. It really is a great stepping stone to being in law enforcement. We have 2 current former Riverside Police Explorers on the department, myself and Sergeant Coder, so clearly it's paid off for us. So I just want to thank you again for allowing us to have the post and for your support and letting us attend the conference.
You know, I'd like to mention Brian underestimated something. So Quinn was 3rd in the nation. Okay, so our explorer took 3rd in bike policing in the nation. That is quite an accomplishment. So I want to personally congratulate you. That's outstanding. And I think Brian should brief the board maybe on how many active police officers that we have graduated from our program that are out in the suburbs now. I think the trustees would be interested in that.
Yeah, our post is very successful in that regard. I'm trying to think off the top of my head how many we currently have. I mean, we have police officers in Lyons, here, Streamwood. We have one that graduates state police next week, one in the Chicago Police Academy, one in Romeoville, one in Rockford, firemen in Broadview, firemen here, firemen in Chicago, sergeant in Berwyn. I mean, our post has been very successful in generating law enforcement officers. So again, I appreciate that opportunity. I always say I wouldn't have the job I have if I wasn't an explorer here first, because they got me my internship here. And on the first day, I had an application, and ta-da. So, again, I appreciate it.
Well, while we're handing out thank yous, I think it's important to also thank you, Officer Greenwald, because on top of your regular duties that you take your time year in and year out to mentor these young men and women is a wonderful thing, and we're, needless to say, we're very proud of our Explorer posts and all that they've done and how they represent our village throughout the nation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone like to address the board this evening? Hearing none, we'll move on to reports of village officers. I have no report this evening. Manager Francis?
I have no report.
Moving to the approval of the consent agenda, I note for the trustees that there has been a slight modification in the regular meeting minutes for July 19, 2018. You have that there in front of you. Assuming that that modification is all right with everyone, we'll just leave this on the consent agenda. See no objection. The consent agenda this evening includes the approval of the voucher list of bills for August 2, 2018, to approve the Village Board of Trustee regular meeting minutes July 19, 2018, file and review the Economic Development Commission meeting minutes of May 10, the Historical Commission meeting minutes of June 18, and the Community Development Department meeting monthly report of June 18. Also, a resolution approving the Illinois Department of Transportation's Construction Engineering Services Agreement for federal participation for the Metro Station Area Pedestrian Access Improvement Project. And that's it. Does anyone need anything removed for discussion? Hearing none, I'd ask for a motion second to approve.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Gisa, second over here by Mr. Ballery. Please call the roll.
Trustee Colick. Aye. Trustee Gisa.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Sedeby.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries. Moving on to reports of departments and commissions, commissions, and trustee liaisons. Does anyone have a report to share this evening? Hearing none, we'll move on to ordinances and resolution. First up is a resolution approving a retention agreement with Edelson PC relative to its proposed representation of the Village of Riverside in a class action lawsuit against opioid manufacturers, distributors, and related parties. Manager Francis.
Thank you. Due to the nationwide epidemic, the village has not been immune to this crisis and has experienced numerous opioid-related incidents impacting both the fire and police department. A number of communities that have been impacted by this crisis have already filed lawsuits against opioid manufacturers, distributors, and those that prescribe these narcotics. Currently, Edelson PC represents 29 of those communities. For your approval this evening is their retention agreement. If there are any questions with regard to that.
First, I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve the resolution. By Mr. Pollack.
Second.
Second by Mr. Gisa. Further comment or considerations? Please call the roll.
Trustee Colick. Aye. Trustee Gisa.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Sedeby.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Can we turn the
Turn the
speaker
volume
down?
Liz, you're very loud.
Next up.
Sorry.
No, it's not you. It's not you.
Next up is an ordinance adding a new section to 148, fees and costs of collections to the Village Code of the Village of Riverside regarding fees and cost of collection. Director Johns.
Good evening. The village utilizes a third party to collect P-ticket violation revenues. In 2017, over $35,000 in tickets were paid. However, $10,918 was retained by that collection agency. The attached ordinance in front of you tonight will give the village the authority to pass on that collection cost and to retain 100% of the revenue.
I ask for a motion and a second to approve an ordinance adding a new section to 148, fees and costs of collections of the Village Code regarding fees and cost of collection. So moved by Mr. Sedeby.
Second.
By Mr. Gisa.
I do have a question. You said P-ticket. Could you just help us understand exactly what we're collecting for that this applies to?
Those are the local tickets that don't go to Cook County. Chief, would you be able to give some example of those?
Yeah, P tickets stand for parking, so anything that goes
Kinda
on
figured
parking
that,
ticket, but it can be more than a parking violation, so it could be a equipment violation, for example. Officers could write taillights out on a vehicle or something, but they are minor, non-moving violations, almost exclusively parking tickets.
This would be for vehicle stickers too, then I should
Yes.
say, an example?
Yes.
And does the actual ticket, I'm sure you've thought about, but does the actual ticket allow for this collection? Because I know sometimes they say on the ticket when fines double and how that all works, so is that all updated?
Yes, we will have to update that, and the next item on the agenda is to update the agreement with the collection agency.
Well, I'm talking about the actual ticket, because when
So the printed citation that the
Citation.
violator receives,
Yeah.
it currently does not state on the citation that there is a collection, if you don't pay it. Because if you walk in the police station and pay it, you'd pay $50.
Right.
So if you go into collections or you pay it online, it doesn't say on the face of the ticket that there is, but that is universal. So those tickets are printed for us in accordance with the Cook County clerk system guidelines for what needs to go on those citations.
So we don't have to include that the cost of enforcement would be added to the ticket or any notice on the ticket for that?
On the face of the ticket itself that
Yeah.
you give, you do not.
Okay.
But
That
we do,
surprises me.
we do when we go online, yeah, on the ordinance. and-
Okay.
Right, but not the ticket we put on somebody's windshield for
Okay.
parking.
Other questions? Please call the roll.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Setterby.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next is a resolution authorizing the village manager to execute a contract with Municipal Collection Services for debt collection services. Director Johnson.
This is the third-party vendor that we just discussed, Municipal Collection Services, Inc. We've been very happy with this service. This is just updating that agreement to allow them to add that and recover our costs.
Ask for a motion in a second to approve the resolution. Motion by Mr. Ballerine and second by Mr. Pollock. Questions? Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Setterby.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, Director Johnson. And lastly, an ordinance approving a sign variation for wall signs on the west and south elevations that do not face a public street for the building at 105 East Burlington Street, Amita Health Medical Group. Director Apt.
Yes, we received a sign variance application from the petitioner on behalf of Amita Health Medical Group. They're requesting a variation in order to install 2 signs on the property that's in the B1 TC zoning district. One would be on a wall that faces to the west, faces a parking lot. It does not face a public street. The other one is on the south elevation, which faces the railroad tracks. The way the B1 sign regulations are written is that wall signs are only permitted on facades that face a street. So they are not permitted to have signs on those walls, hence the need for a variation. In addition, their initial application also had a total square footage that exceeded their maximum area of 40 square feet for that wall signage. So when the 2 signs were combined together, it exceeded the 40 square feet. The Planning and Zoning Commission held a public hearing on July 25th. And at the public hearing, they recommended approval of the variation to allow signage on the non-street frontage walls, i.e. the west and south walls, but they recommended denial of the variation to allow the maximum sign area to exceed 40 square feet. Additionally, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended that future consideration by the Commission and the Board to have a text amendment to allow railroad-facing signage in the B1 zoning district. According to our village code, there's certain standards that have to be met for a sign variance. You have those in your agenda history sheet. At the meeting, the commissioners were trying to balance the need for signage as well as being reasonable. So there was some talk back and forth about the signage, and ultimately they felt that the signage was larger than what was necessarily needed, and that they should be able to have a combined square footage that was 40 square feet or less. You have in your packet a revised sign detail for the sign on the west-facing wall that the petitioner provided. He went back to his clients after the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, and they revised that sign to shrink it down in size. So now it is only believe, about 13 and a half square feet. So that brings that combined total to below 40 square feet. So they no longer have the need for the sign area variation. So the only variation before you would be for the location of the signs being on the west wall and the south wall. You have the findings of fact from the Plan Commission before you. The petitioner is also here to answer any questions. In reviewing some of the Planning and Zoning Commission's concerns about illumination, staff did note that our illumination hours restriction is only for the B2 district. So there is no restriction in the B1 district about how long or any specific hour that you have to turn off your illumination on your signs. So staff did have a recommendation that if you do approve this sign variation, that you include a condition that the signs may only be illuminated during office hours, which is what I put in the staff report. Mr. Potts is here representing Amita Health Group. He says he's talked to his clients and they would like to, they're not necessarily on board with being restricted to office hours, and they would like to be able to have a discussion on perhaps having different restriction on the illumination hours. So he is here to be able to discuss that with you and what would be, what his ideas are on that for them. And you have the ordinance in front of you. You can amend it to add whatever condition on the illumination hours you feel is appropriate.
So first, let's have a motion to approve a sign variation ordinance for walls facing west and south, elevations that do not face a public street at the building at 105 East Burlington Street.
So moved.
By Mr. Valerie,
Second.
by Mr. Gisa. Mr. Potts, would you like to address the board?
Good evening, thank you. My name is Gary Potts. I am the owner of Professional Permits. My offices are at 58171 Dragonfly Court in Osceola, Indiana. I'm here tonight representing G&D Geodopolis and Amita Healthcare. We had discussed in the meeting, and she'd done a fine job of summarizing everything. Really what I want to talk about today, in essence of saving time, is the illumination request that it would meet the hours of operation. We did approach staff today after learning that that was the recommendation, and we asked them that if we could propose a condition whereas we would measure the foot candle output at the property line on the south and the west side of the property before the signs go up. And then once the signs are up, measure the foot candle output and have that not exceed what is there before. If you look on the artwork, the sign that is on the rear elevation facing the railroad tracks, there is a metal halide light right now that is going to be replaced with this illuminated sign on the rear property. And there's also wall packs on the west side of the building that face the residential immediately to the west. And so as opposed to just limiting those completely to office hours, we would like to have those signs illuminated. However, we are aware that there are residences surrounding the property. So in essence of being a good neighbor, we don't want to light up the side of their house or their property. So we work in various municipalities, and some of with the new LED lights coming in, those tend to give off sometimes what's considered a harsh light versus the incandescent. So what we're proposing is done a lot in the Carolinas, where basically they get a foot candle measurement at the property line, so they don't allow for light pollution going on to the neighboring properties. So I thought that would be a good proposal in this particular instance. Shared that with staff. Staff was supportive. Now what we have a disagreement on, or I guess just a difference of opinion, is the hours that the sign can be illuminated. We would like the sign to be illuminated to match the B2 zoning, which I believe is 12:30 to 5:30 in the morning. It has to be off. We would like to match that. Right now, I understand that B2 is primarily more business and not as much residential, but I think with the condition where we put on, where we're not exceeding the existing light output, spill over onto adjacent properties, I think that's an appropriate request at this time. So if I have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Anything from Mr. Potts?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Why until 12:30? What's the benefit?
The trains coming in with the facing the back property, we think that we will pick up additional, not necessarily that we're open, but that the fact that the office is there, And we just want people aware that we do have a medical office there if they do need to have a physician, if they have a need, and we know that that's an office that's close to the train station.
So the purpose is more advertising than wayfinding, because I think that wayfinding was what was originally planning and zoning had identified as the purpose of the signage.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it seems like the rush hour trains that probably end about 7 p.m.
Correct. I think at about 7 p.m. it turns to hourly after
Right.
that.
Anything else for Mr. Potts? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Discussion? Mr. Pollak?
I'm okay with the variation as recommended by the Plan Commission, and in terms of the restrictions on the hours, because it is adjacent to single-family residential zoning, I'm thinking more like 10 p.m. for them to be shut off, and with the provision remaining that Mr. Potts suggested on the foot candle measurement.
Other comments?
I guess I did have one question. What are the hours of operation?
Good question.
I don't have exactly the days, but there's a few days a week they're open till 5, and then others are open till 7. So, and I believe they open at 8 each day.
I mean, I would say, based on the trains, because I think it's great to give visibility to the businesses in town, but I would recommend 8 p.m. because of the single-family homes. That still gives you, allows you to get through the rush hour trains that are going by without causing any type of distraction for the homeowners that live directly behind it. But that's just.
Let me throw my 2 cents. I'm concerned about this variation. Looking at the standards, I don't see how either the hardship standard or the unique circumstances standard are met. And if you read, if you watch the meeting, there was really no clear articulation of how either of those standards were met. I think in watching the meeting, the impression I got was that with regard to the advertising component, that the Planning and Zoning Commission wanted to send a message to this board that we might want to consider allowing, by a text amendment, signs of this kind in the B1 business district. I think it's problematic, though, to use that desire to bootstrap your way into meeting the standards for a variation. I think a more appropriate move would be to apply the standards strictly as we normally do, and I don't believe that this variation request meets those standards. But then if this board feels like this is something that you want to allow in the future for this and other businesses, that the proper route would be a text amendment that would address directly the question of signage in the B1, and in particular signage facing the train station. That's my 2 cents.
I mean, certainly Riverside's unique in that the businesses are not facing the railroad tracks. That's a disadvantage for the businesses. So I think that having signage facing the tracks will bring more visibility to choo-choo, this, that. Doesn't Riverside Bank have a sign on the back of their building, or is that my imagination? It does, right?
I guess my response to that would be, though, that everybody in this building could make exactly the same argument that this petitioner is making. So how do you say yes to him just because he got here first, and so now he gets the sign space? I just don't see, and that those businesses, my doctor was there for years, right? That we've had medical practice in that building forever, and only now are we seeing this desire for the signage, which I don't necessarily disagree with in terms of having the sign. I'm concerned that this waters down our variation process, because if you allow the reasoning that was used with regard to hardship and unique circumstances in this setting, it's hard for me to imagine any petitioner that couldn't make exactly the same argument. Well, we need a text amendment, and because we don't have a text amendment, then I need to have a variation. it completely eviscerates the whole variation process, it seems to me. So, I mean, I think, I don't mind ending up at the same place, but I think in terms of process, it might be better to do it through the text amendment process and address this head on. Mr. Pollak?
I agree with most of what you just said in terms of, you're right, that it can't be justified in terms of meeting the findings of fact. And I was going to bring up, after some discussion, that we should do a text amendment. And I feel strongly that any business that backs up to the railroad tracks ought to have some signage facing the railroad tracks, like we do in downtown. So it becomes a policy question, I think, for us. And we have in the past approved variations with the intent of amending the zoning ordinance in the future to make that variation go away. It's, a little bit iffy maybe doing it that way, but because you could change your mind or find some other information out that leads you to think, no, I don't want to do a text amendment. But we have done that in the past, and I think in this case I'm comfortable doing it because I feel pretty strongly that that's a text amendment that's a pretty clear-cut amendment that we'd want to do.
Anything from this side?
And I believe that we've given the direction to the Planning and Zoning Commission that we want to be pro-business, and I think they were just following our lead. So I would vote in favor of this variation and follow up with the text amendment.
Anything else?
I concur as well. I think the only dispute on the table is the hours, and I think we've had 8 and 10 to discuss as far as the hours of which they must be turned off.
Right now on the table is 8.
Oh, 8 o'clock? Okay.
Well, Wendell said 8, I said 10.
Hence
I
the
thought,
nine
I
o'clock.
thought I saw you nod your head at 8.
I got his point. I was just acknowledging that he was making me go.
It was an acknowledging nod, not an agreeing.
I mean, I guess I look at it as, in a residential area, when do I get upset that my neighbor still has his exterior lights on? Well, not till 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Then I might get a little bit agitated. But up until 10 o'clock, he can have every exterior light on he wants.
If that's not your neighbor, this is a business.
Well, I know, but it's still that what we're talking about here is what is the impact on the resident across the railroad track.
Right.
And I kind of see going to 10 o'clock, the impact is very similar to what you would normally expect in a residential district. So that was my logic on the 10 o'clock.
And I think with the added stipulation on the measuring the existing candle watts,
Right.
it's actually an improvement. So I would be supportive of 10 o'clock as well.
I mean, I think, I see what you're saying with 8, but I think 10 is probably, I mean, it would be out when it's still light out most, half of the year. So it would be basically a worthless illumination for half of the year. So I think at least, so 10 o'clock makes sense.
Yeah, I'm not taking my heels in on this one.
Trustee?
I do think the President Salisbury's got a good point with the process, though. I mean, process is important, and I think that getting that text amendment done quickly is something we should try and do.
Trustee Peters, did you have comments?
I generally agree. Trustee Valerie and Trustee Sedevig.
With regard to the 10 o'clock, or with regard to approving the variation, or both?
Approving the variation, and I do think a text amendment would be advantageous here in the future.
Okay. Anything else? Please call the roll.
Well,
And these will be
Oh.
with the conditions in the ordinance that the illumination will be measured and stop at the property line, and that the hours of operation will be from opening of business until 10 p.m.
And so a yes vote is a vote to approve the variation.
Correct. We don't need a new motion if
Right.
everyone is on
Right.
board, but those will be the condition.
Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollak.
I
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Sedevik.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
The motion carries. Thank you, Director. Thank you, Mr. Potts. We'll move now to considerations. First up this evening is an ongoing discussion regarding the proposed amendments to the licensing requirements for vacation rentals and for bed and breakfast. You have before you a draft. Basically, what I did was based on the comments from the last meeting. I went through a first draft to try to memorialize the comments that had been made by the trustees. Then this was given to staff, and then staff and our attorneys also went through it and made further changes. And as you know, we've also heard from Trustee Peters. For our convenience, she sent ahead some of her comments about some changes she would like to have incorporated. And then also we have information from Trustee Pollock about some changes he would like to have made. Maybe the most efficient way to do this would be to first go through, because I think Trustee Peters' comments highlighted some confusion in the draft that was given to you. So maybe we should take a look at this with regard to her comments first. Trustee Peters, I know it's hard that you're on a time delay, so with your permission, I'll just kind of go through what you sent to us, and then obviously if you want to add to it, just jump in at any time. There in the, let's see.
Trustee Lumsden also forwarded me comments recently.
So one thing that we were looking at here is trying to, we were moving to, if you look at the definition of guest room, and this language is repeated else in other locations, no guest room shall accommodate more than 2 guests, not including children under the age of 12, it says in the guest room definition. Elsewhere in here it says children under the age of 5. Trustee Peters suggests that the age limit for what counts as a child sleeping in a room should be 12 and not 5, which I personally tend to agree with, but are there any thoughts contrary?
Trustee Lumsden had forwarded me, and he actually has a comment, if I may.
Yes, please.
He stated the kid's age should be consistent if altered, and that he is fine with 18 years of age if an age needs to be specified at all.
The concept behind the age is a situation in which, say a family is traveling with small children, so maybe you have 2 queen beds and you have mom and dad and a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old kind of thing, versus a situation where you have 4 20-somethings that want to stay in a room. Not that I have anything against 20-somethings, but so 4 adults in a room. So the concept is it would be 2 adults in a given guest room, and then you would make allowances for small children. So that was where the conversation between 12 years or 5 years came in.
Can I make a recommendation?
Sure.
Before we get too far down the road, I think this was a good experiment for the last year, and I think one thing that I've come away with, and I thank Trustee Pollock for this last meeting when he was formulating opinion. He made a mention about 60 days and whether the owner should be there, and then he said, I don't know if I'd want this in my neighborhood or my backyard. And I went home and I sat in my backyard, and I looked out, and I sit in and I share backyards with four other neighbors because of the way I'm on a pie, and I don't know if I'd be comfortable with people around a barbecue pit or a fire pit, 60 nights a year in the backyard when my wife and I are enjoying, our backyard. Now, if my neighbor was doing it, I don't think I'd have a problem with it because I'd probably be invited over to it. But when people are here visiting, they're often in a different mode. So I think that I think we did we tried this. I don't think vacation rentals, Airbnbs are acceptable in the residential areas. Now, whether we want to visit this in our business district, that's another thing. But I think in our residential areas, by allowing this, we've caused you know, a lot of animosity has been caused over this issue, and I think it's not worth moving on forward. And I can't see any other group of neighbors acting any, you know, or I just would rather not do it in the residential areas. There's probably enough said.
Other comments? Because obviously, if that's the wish of the board, we don't have to go through all this. Mr. Quallen?
I'm okay with moving forward with something, but much even more restrictive than what the draft ordinance. And, you know, I had sent, or Jessica on my behalf had sent everybody some of my comments, and I just made up a number of 7 people. It could be 6, it could be 8, it could be 4, whatever. But I don't mind doing something, but I mean, I agree with the sentiment of Trustee Ballerine's comments. It's, yeah, I'm trying to craft this to be similar to, I've got a neighbor who likes to have parties or have guests over on a regular basis. And that's why I said the last time, I think the key is that it be an owner-occupied house. In other words, the owner lives there. And that way the neighbors know the owner, and they're a little bit more comfortable with strangers over there because they're going to see the owners coming and going on a regular basis. But I can certainly understand the issues with it, and I just think it has to be limited. And in terms of the age, I'm okay with the age limit of 12 years old as a definition of a child.
What about, can you also weigh in on what Trustee Ballerin just said?
I don't think I would want my neighbor renting a VRBO, but I understand what we intended to do with it. I don't think was represented well. You know, like I said last minute, we whiffed, right? But when, you know, if you whiff, it doesn't mean that you're out. I think that the Bears said themselves at the first meeting that if they knew their neighbors were upset with this, that they would have stopped it, then they would have ceased the business. I think it became more of an event location than a you know, couple of parents coming in to visit their grandkids or whatever. You know, I'd like people to have access to Riverside, and that's great. Personally, I don't want it next to my house, but I think that if we put more restrictions on it and learn from our mistakes, it could be beneficial to the community for people that have visitors coming in.
I don't disagree with
Yeah.
you, but my point is, if I don't want it next to my house,
Yeah.
I don't have right to put it next to your house.
Right. I get
That's
it.
my
Yeah.
point.
I'm on the fence on it. Yeah. I mean, I'm either all out or moderately in, so I'm very neutral on this one.
The other aspect of this that I think we need to keep at the forefront of the discussion is the option of special uses. I mean, because I think there has to be locations in this village where, you know, someone could have a larger vacation rental or bed and breakfast where they could accommodate 10, 12 or more guests. But the special use process allows them to go through a public hearing, get input from the neighbors, get their concerns, look at the property, see how they're going to manage it. And you could even make it a temporary special use so that they kind of have a trial period.
We had that for bed and breakfast.
We have it for bed and breakfast,
So that's
right?
what we should just.
But, yeah,
We should stay with
so
bed
you
and
have to serve breakfast to get a special use.
No, not really. I mean, I've stayed in bed and breakfast and all I got was a granola bar. in the morning.
But that's what, yeah, well, that's what I'm struggling is what's really, in terms of land use and how it impacts the neighborhood, what's the difference between a bed and breakfast and a vacation rental? I don't see any difference. So when I say vacation rental, I mean both. I mean all of it. 'Cause-
I was just going to add, legally and traditionally, fundamentally, the difference between a vacation rental or Airbnb and a real bed and breakfast is the bed and breakfasts generally allow, they're like a private hotel in a house where multiple rentals can happen by people who don't know each other in different parts of the location. for however many.
We're going to define for
That's-
ourselves what it is.
That is typically, but I'm just saying, traditionally, whereas an Airbnb or a vacation rental is simply one rental at a time. So,
You know, it's interesting, Trustee Ballerine said, the Bears have displayed that a bed and breakfast could do very well in Riverside, which I think is really interesting. So, you know, the trailblazers in a way. I think that where the issue comes up is that the neighbors who have moved from the city to move to Riverside that live around the area, it's not about the noise, it's about the strangers, it's about people being there and not having it be people that they know. So if it were in the central business district, if their house was in the central business district, this would be fantastic for the village. I'm leaning towards what Joe mentioned.
Mr. Sedeby, thoughts?
I support the amendment as drafted. I think it was well drafted, and I want to be careful not to go too far the other direction. I think this was a very well-intentioned policy early on. We took best practices of other villages. The implementation probably could have gone better, but I don't want to walk away from this concept at all, or frankly make it a special use if we can put, you know, a little tighter parameters on it. So I do feel that what's proposed in our packet is a compromise that I would support, and I do support the 12-year-old age as well on that.
Ms. Peters, did you want to weigh in on Mr. Ballerine's point? Mr. Ballerine's point about just not allowing it in the residential district at all?
Sure. I think for me, the difference comes down to, I call it a retreat center or a event center versus a vacation rental. And I think this is what I think about when I'm hearing Trustee Ballerine, is that he's envisioning kind of that event or retreat kind of environment. When I think about vacation rentals, I think about, you know, my family, extended family coming to Riverside. They can't fit inside my small house, and so, you know, one family goes to a neighbor's house and can stay there. And that's kind of my vision, as opposed to, you know, something that has a lot of activity and movement and energy going on with people who I understand not necessarily wanting to have that in your backyard. But at the same time, I think there's a big difference between that kind of event or retreat feel and having a vacation rental where it's probably unlikely you're going to see those people outside of that home, spending lots of time doing things there. They're probably coming to either spend time with their family or they're coming to enjoy the city or whatever it is. But it's a different vibe and a different feel. That's why I'm in favor of trying again and giving this one more shot. I do think that it's not endless. We should be very wary of this next trial period, and if it does not go well, I mean, you know, we should learn from that lesson. But I would be hesitant to just throw in the towel at this point.
Did Mr. Morrison have anything?
He did. He echoed some of the comments. So he said big wedding events that have many visitors, corporate training type events, events with music, bands, or sporting activities, we need to follow. He wants essentially the special use process. He said that he's not ready to give up on the opportunity based on a couple of issues, and also had the statement, we are neighbors, and neighbors learn and work peacefully together. So he essentially wanted to try to make adjustments and modifications.
I think he also indicated that he was fine with the current math too on the number
The
of.
200 square footage, yes.
So he was still fine with the 21 residents in this specific, 21 occupants in this specific instance.
That is correct. He would be fine, he may support a reduction to 45 days going forward.
Okay, well, it seems like there's enough interest in at least working through this to see if we can reach something with more restrictions. Mr. Powell?
I just wanted to summarize my opinion of this, because there's a few key aspects of this that it's not just the number. The number is probably one item that is negotiable to me. If it's 2 per guest room, I could probably live with that if these other conditions are met. And the ones that really mean the most to me are that the owner lives in the house, it's their primary residence. Don't always have to be there, but they have to have a designated manager within 30 minutes, but it is their primary residence. That let's see, what else was very specific regulations on when the license can be revoked, and also a restriction on the number of non-overnight guests that can be at the vacation rental. I'm okay with guests. You know, I'm visiting friends and family and I'm staying there, and a few of them come by to visit or have dinner or whatever, but it needs to be kind of an accessory part of it, not the main part of it. And finally, and this, again, this is critical, anybody who wants to go above those minimum requirements can ask for a special use, and we can evaluate it on a case-by-case basis.
I agree with everything Trustee Pollock said. The one thing I want to be careful of is we spend a lot of time and a lot of money on this issue now, and if we're still kind of maybe in a trial period, I'd like to avoid something that requires a public hearing and additional costs as well.
So I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. So let's say that I have a 1-bedroom condo, but I'm gone 3 months of the year in Florida. Can I rent it out while I'm gone?
That's a good question, and I thought about that, and we'd have to decide. My tendency is to be conservative and say, no, you need to come and request a special use approval. And if the homeowners association or condo association is okay with it, then we're probably going to grant the special use approval. If someone, wants to, for whatever reason, can't accommodate more than 2 people per guest room, that's probably not a very good example, but there may be other aspects of someone's particular situation that they can ask special use approval for. I just want to be very conservative on what we permit as of right.
Can I make a comment? Please. So Sonia, we currently have 0 applications for this, correct?
We received 1 application.
We have 1.
We have 1 approved. Obviously, we have our licensee, but we have received 1. We just received 1 additional.
Is the one that was approved still valid, or is it?
Yes.
So it hasn't been removed?
The Bears has not been
Okay.
removed, no. So theirs is.
No, their existing, their previous application that we approved is still in
Yes,
good standing.
they had
thought they were
applied
tracked.
to renew, but we're not quite into renewal mode yet, since it is only July, and theirs did not officially get issued until, I think, November. So there wasn't really a need to renew it just yet, even though it had been a year since they started the process previously, because they submitted their application initially in July, but it took us several months to get to the point of actually issuing the license. But I did receive an email from them today saying that they would be revoking their application to renew based on
The new house, the new application you have, is it located in the business district? Right?
It is located in the B2. It's in the mixed-use periphery on Forest Avenue in a condo.
See, I really think that is where this belongs, in the B1, B2. I would like to see us go down that road and stay out of the residentials. And this whole process, it reminds me of bees. We're going to spend hours on this and thousands of dollars, and no one's going to have a beehive. I think it's the residential or the B1, B2 is, I think that's where this belongs, and we move on.
Thoughts? Are we still in the same place? We're gonna still.
I feel like we're overcomplicating this. I mean, and when something's-
Well, no, so let's, we're gonna have to jump around here then. So let's tackle the Doug's basic premise. Do we want to make vacation rentals? We're not talking about bed and breakfast. Do we want to make vacation rentals where it has to be the primary residence of the owner?
Yes.
Yes, are you gonna take notes of this? Okay. Yes? Okay, are you on board with that, Trustee Peters?
Yes.
Okay. So let's go back now to another aspect from Trustee Peters, which I thought was a really good point. She suggests that there should be a 2-night minimum rental requirement to avoid transient rentals. And she points out that most rentals are in 2-day increments anyway, and she ties that in with the change from a not to exceed 15 days. She says if we're going to have a not to exceed date or number, it should be an even number to go along with the 2 consecutive rental requirement. So we could either go back to the 30 that it was originally, or we could have some increment that's an even number. There really wasn't a lot of talk about the 30-day to start with. That would probably be the easiest thing to do, is just leave it in its original form at 30. Yes,
Can I ask a question about the primary residence? That, to me, didn't solve the ambiguity about a primary residence where someone's present not the whole year.
good point. Do we?
I don't know that we.
That's it. So do we want? So because your point, I think, Trustee Pollack, is you want the owner there when it's being rented, right?
Or proximity. He wants proximity.
Well, no. I mean, I would prefer that, but to say that the owner always has to be there, like a bed and breakfast, I think is probably going too far.
So the owner or an authorized agent within 30-mile kind of thing, like we had before.
And I was going to, at some point ask the village attorney to help us define what primary residence is. I don't know how we define that, but if someone's not there for 6 months out of the year, then that's a problem. That's what I want to avoid, or even 3 months.
Well, I mean, to me.
That's a tough standard.
Primary
residence is 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's more a responsibility thing, I think.
Right.
It's more of being available, I think.
I think you're answering your own question, Trustee Pollack. If it's a primary resident and
Yes.
there's a
Proximity.
manager or the owner is within 30 minutes or whatever we decide, I think that solves that problem.
And I would think that you'd also may think about when your number of people. So if you have more than 7, the owner has to be on site. Because that's when you're really looking at something that can get out of hand quickly. So maybe something,
So if you had it, now I'm thinking about this more. If you have going on vacation, I'm going down to Seaside, Florida, and I'm renting a house down there, and I'm like, all right, well, I'm gone, I'm gonna rent my house up in Chicago, right, in Riverside. Give someone an opportunity to come here. So I rented out for 7 days, that's great. I think that the best way to put hooks into this is, I'm backing out of my business district, because I think that allowing folks to come, like Trustee Peters said, to visit and come see their family and have a spot to go is great. But if we put a number on, maybe it's 6, whether it's 8, I'm not sure what that is, but that does achieve our goal of having people come to Riverside, spend a weekend visiting their family or visiting the town and walking the streets. I think if it gets to 10, 12, kids or not, I think at that point, you go stay at the Carlton or you go stay at a hotel, because that's when it's going to interfere with the privacy of someone sitting in their backyard having a glass of wine. When that group gets to a certain, picnicking is one thing, but this is your backyard. And so you might want to get folks more on the number than the actual, all these different moving parts, square footage, this, that.
So, I mean, in researching what other communities are doing across the nation dealing with this issue, a lot of them do put on a maximum number. So that is a very common thing that you find, whether it's a maximum number of guests, or there might be also an additional maximum number of people. So you're maybe only limited to 6 guests, but they would allow no more than 11 people on site, so that you have that flexibility to be able to have a few guests over. So there's some communities that do that, but a lot of communities have some sort of hard, fast number. You can have 2 people per guest room. However, in no case can the number of people on site exceed, and those numbers vary from like 4 to 14, kind of depending on where you're looking at in different towns that you're looking at. So ones that are more resort towns, or people are, buying investment properties, and so they have single-family homes that they're renting out year-long almost to people. Those communities tend to have a higher number of people that they allow to have in there. Other communities, you definitely have it on the lower end. And even so, you have a lot of communities that restrict it only to, as Trustee Ballerine was saying, that it's limited to commercial areas or mixed-use commercial areas. So I think they're trying to keep it out of residential districts. So they allow it, it's only in those areas, and then they do tend to have a maximum of like 4 people, because obviously you're looking at probably like a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom condo in those instances when they're in the downtown area. So that's where you see a lot of the lower numbers for maximum people.
And then the fewer number of days would control it as well. If it dropped down to 30 or 25 or whatever it is, there'd be fewer number of days that a homeowner could rent their place out, which would be less disturbing to the surrounding neighbors. I'm going back to what the Bears said the first meeting.
And it's so the thought process behind the 2 per guest room is, if you just set a number, if you said under no circumstance can you have more than 6 people, okay, now you got a 1-bedroom apartment. You don't want 6 people.
But then you still have the limitations by the bedroom.
Yes. Yeah, so
you need both, for sure.
That's what I heard Director Happy say. You could say two per guest room, and not to exceed whatever number you decide that number is going to be.
Yeah.
So let's just finish that thought then. If we say two guests per guest room, not counting children under the age of 12, what is the maximum occupancy? Well, 2 questions. 1, what would be the maximum occupancy? And 2, do you want to allow invitees onto the property? Do you want a situation where somebody who is staying there can invite somebody over?
I don't know how we can restrict someone from inviting someone over. How do you ever enforce that?
Enforcement would be an issue, but it's not uncommon. We're getting ready to stay at a Airbnb down in Hilton Head, and they have exactly that restriction, that we're not allowed to invite people into the property.
Some communities do specifically prohibit any non-guest people being at a vacation rental. That's written into their ordinances.
Yeah, the application requires identification of everyone who's going to be there, and that's how they would be able to follow up if there was damage or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this goes to Trustee Ballerine's point. Okay, so you set your maximum occupancy at 7, but you can have 15. Well, then you've got the party in the backyard again. Going back to what I think my impression mirrors what Trustee Peters was describing, is that this was always, I thought the intent was this to be an opportunity for people to come stay in Riverside and explore Riverside and visit, not for it to be like a retreat center kind of operation. So what do you think about the number of guests and the invitees?
I like two per bedroom, children, not including children 12 or under, and I would say a maximum of 10. And I would say we have to allow for a few guests. I mean, if I have family come staying in a neighbor's, I can't go to the neighbor's. I mean, it's just common sense. So I think there's got to be some number. Maybe it's not double, but some number.
So let me just ask you a question on that. So that you're saying 10. Let's say it's 5 couples, and each couple has 4 kids under 12. I mean, there's still that loophole there that would allow for 30 people to be in the house.
And that's why this was drafted the way it was, to say no more than 4 times the number of guest rooms. I mean, I know that that's cumbersome, that language, but that was an attempt to not was to address that,
Right.
that potential.
Right, okay, yeah, I agree with that too, right. So no more than, yeah, that's fine.
Because I think and you know, Trustee Ryan, you probably used this a lot more than I ever have. I mean, usually you're talking about a one or two bedroom place, right? So you're talking about 8 people max, 4 adults and 4 children under 12. So what about I mean, I certainly agree that the invitee issue is impossible to enforce.
Yeah.
But it addresses a concern.
It does, but I don't want to also be in a situation where someone just says, hey, there's one person that came up to the door, and then we have to respond. I mean, it's just, some of it's just kind of, there's got to be some latitude there.
Yeah, if you're coming to visit your family, you want your mom or dad to come over and say hello, or a friend, right? But I still think, I think 10's a little much.
Well, 10's a maximum.
Including children?
No. Excluding children, limited to.
A 5-bedroom.
Right, that would have to be a 5-bedroom home. Because I don't think 14, if you've got 10 adults, if you've got 14 family members at the Bears house, I don't think that's excessive, I really don't.
I don't think it's excessive for the house. I think it might be excessive for the neighbors, which was what the neighbors said when they came. That's my point. I'm not worried about the house. I'm worried about the people
But I
living
think the family is a different situation because it's families with their children. It's not 23 adults.
Fair enough, yeah.
But it does introduce a different set of potential nuisance. I understand that too. And I'm just talking maximum. I mean, a big enough house, a big enough lot, I don't think that's excessive.
What was the number? I can't remember. What's the maximum number of days that a house can rent in this?
Right now it's 60.
60. So
In a
that's also-
calendar year, yeah.
You can always put a maximum number of people that can rent, and whatever that number is, comes where, you know, you do your math with 7, or 2 adults, and blah, 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 that's 8. Visitors can't be more than, you know, some sort of calculation based on the whole. So if the house is, you cannot have more than 10 people on the property, or something like that. Where, you know, if you have 8 people, you can have 2. If you have 5 people, you can have 5. But there's got to be a maximum amount of people that are available on the property. Yes, Lance?
One suggestion would be that maximum could override the children exemption.
That's fair.
You know what I mean? In
That's
other
fair.
words, in no event shall more than so many human beings be present on the site. And then how that all shakes out, as far as who's a guest and who's a child, you know, you got this maximum capacity, which would override everything. That's another one.
But then you could have 20 adults.
No, you'd have the other.
If you set the
rules.
limit at 20.
Yeah, I mean, you could deal with that separately, but by having a total max, it would deal with that. You could also have a max of, you know, guests for a given property.
So I guess that's, okay, so that helps. So are we saying that we don't want more than, let's assume a 5-guest room place. Are we saying that we don't want more than 10 adults?
Yes.
Max?
Oh,
2 per bedroom is what we're saying.
staying there.
Including, no, I'm going using Lance's idea. You can't have more than 10 adults, period. So you could have 5 guests, and then they could invite 5 friends, but you couldn't have more than 10 adults on the premises at any time. And then you wouldn't include, in that number, you would not include children under 12. You'd only be talking about adults. I mean, that would be a way of addressing it, yeah.
One way.
So that would mean in a 3-bedroom home, you could have a combination of 6 adults.
And 4
whether
guests.
they're overnight or guests.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
plus children, yeah, under 12.
Thanks, Judy.
Does that sound like a reasonable compromise? I mean, we're going to bring this back again to how Lance can work out this language. Okay, so our Trustee Peters, are you okay with that? Well, it would be based on the guest rooms, I think is what people are saying. So if it was a 3-guest room place, the maximum number of adults would be 6, correct?
And there's a maximum number of bedrooms, correct?
I don't know.
You had 5, isn't it?
Yeah, there's
Right,
5, yeah.
Yeah, that's in there already.
Can't this second draft that comes back
That's not
be
in there.
done by staff rather than by our legal team?
We can try.
Just so it comes back to us, we can then take a second look at it and then have a final legal draft. Just to,
Feel up to that, Director?
Happy to make whatever revisions you want.
I mean, staff did this, so it's just, and I know I appreciate.
President Schultz did this.
Well, we all
We're
did.
putting him into
We
staff.
all
I'm
did.
trying to slowly pull him into doing this again.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Yeah.
we can work on it.
Okay, thank
I'm
you.
sure Trustee.
I mean, that's why I did it to
Boggs
start
volunteered
with.
to-
I did it to start with because I didn't want to spend lawyer
I
time.
agree, I agree.
So I was just trying to be
I
a
can see that
scrivener.
Ms. Apathy's giving fine legal advice prior to the meeting on unrelated issues.
There you go.
There we go.
Okay. Are you okay with that, Ms. Peters, what we've been saying?
Yes.
Okay. So next, that's what I love about her. She's to the point. Okay, can I just finish Trustee Peters' comments? Her other one was, is that she's okay with having pets on the rental property. I personally find that problematic because some of the complaints we got were people having pets that were running into other people's yards. But in some ways, I guess you could say that's really up to the owner of the property whether they want to allow it or not.
I would say no pets, and I love dogs, and I have 3, so, you know what I mean?
We have to allow service.
Yeah, you have to allow service pets.
Service
So,
pets, of course.
Am I seeing no
It's easy to get
pets?
that certification still.
Yeah, that's true. Service.
So am I seeing no pets? Is that what I'm
I
saying?
don't have a problem with pets. Again, we have nuisance laws, but
Yeah.
if we enforce our nuisance laws and people report on the nuisance laws, we don't have a problem.
Okay.
Could you permit it so that we're not responding to complaints or calls of dogs on the loose, that the contingent upon the property having a fence? I'm just trying to think a little ahead here. Because usually
My concern is, we have regulations in our town that control pets, that require proper, shots and rabies and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We don't know
We
whether
don't know
people are bringing pets in from outside or following those kind of things. I mean, I kind of like the idea that we would have animals that we are capable of regulating, would be the only ones that we allow. I understand the sentiment, but
I agree with President Sells. I mean, let's keep this clean. It's already complicated.
yeah, okay.
Trustee said you don't want someone bringing their alligator, right?
Okay.
As long as it doesn't bother anyone.
Before, I'm getting ready to come to all of your comments, but so Trustee Peters, I think I got yours. Is there anything that I missed?
That's it, thank you.
Okay. Anything else from Trustee Lumsden?
He's inclined to keep the ordinance as is, with the addition of adding the noise hour and parking criteria regarding notification of renters. I've already mentioned he would be amenable to looking at changing it to 45 days versus 60. He was fine with currently how it's written with the 20 square footage per person rule.
Safe to say he's the most liberal of us on the matter.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think does everyone have the materials that Trustee Pollock sent to us?
Yes.
So Trustee Pollock, you just want to lead us through your...
Well, I don't know that I have anything else to add. I think it's all been covered, the important facts. Some of this is just, dotting the i's.
Yeah, but some of these things I thought were pretty important. Do you mind if we
Sure.
just go through them? So on page 329 of your agenda,
Yeah.
or with Trustee Pollock's comments under owner, he modifies an owner would be someone with at least a 51% ownership interest in the property. Then under manager, he says the owner or an authorized agent. I think we all agreed on that. On the next page, I don't know that I heard any interest in exceeding 60 days from anyone.
No, and I'm not interested
Okay.
in that anymore either.
on page 331 with regard to the safety equipment addendum there. We'll also take care of E with regard to the ownership. I thought the next page, I thought really caught something good on page 332. This seems to anticipate that in a vacation rental, that a vacation rental would be able to rent rooms to different guests on the same night.
Separate rentals. That's
Right, and earlier, we say that there cannot be concurrent rentals, because that is one of the defining differences between the vacation rental and a bed and breakfast. So I think that we need to strike that mention, because we don't, my understanding is we don't want to allow in a vacation rental concurrent rentals. So if a vacation rental had 3 bedrooms, they couldn't have 3 separate guests there.
I
Or
think
3
there's
separate renters.
a lot of vagueness to that, though. I mean, what if, you know, my brother from Philadelphia is coming here and renting a room, and I'm coming from Los Angeles.
It would,
Is that 2
you
rentals?
would.
One agreement, though.
You'd pick.
The key is so you don't have people that don't know each other renting.
That's fine, I'm fine
renting
with that,
separate.
but I think the language needs a lot of work, because
Okay, so we'll fix that.
I didn't understand.
That's the real issue there,
Right.
is by forcing one rental, you force one application with all the guests listed on there. So they can't be disparate groups, even if they're.
So all guests staying at the rental at any given time are all under one application or something to that effect?
Yeah, that's exactly
So we
That's
can,
fine.
we can strike that last sentence then, it
Yeah.
just says, or the rental of rooms to different guests on the same night.
And,
And just get rid of that sentence.
Correct. On page 333, Trustee Pollock, I didn't understand your question about when can it be revoked.
Yeah, I didn't think the ordinance expressly, it talked about revocation, but it didn't say what terms constitute grounds for a revocation. At least I didn't, unless I missed it. I thought we should be clear and state 1 violation or 2 violations or 3.
If I could make a suggestion
Somewhere else
there.
in the code?
I thought it was, but my suggestion would be if it's not, there do need to be standards for revocation, and typically, I would suggest you put in the same standard you put in for your business license, which is basically any violation of the village code qualifies.
I think that's in our code somewhere, we'll find it.
So,
Okay.
but that would be the intention.
And then I didn't understand why you just struck the bed and breakfast.
Well, that was what I said earlier on this evening.
About the owners.
In terms of the land use impact on a neighborhood, I don't see the difference.
So if we adjust things the way we've been talking about, you
Right.
think?
I mean, and if we're saying that it can't be multiple registrations, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
But other than, if we define a bed and breakfast and a vacation rental to be one group and not more than one group, then they're all the same. It's the same land use.
There is an issue, however, on the bed and breakfast that I wanted to point out. Because I put this in thinking it was in line with what, here. So if you look at page 334, under prohibited acts, now this is with regard to a bed and breakfast. It says that, well, there was one ambiguity with when the word service provider. This is also in the vacation rental, because this is kind of going along with only the people that are renting the place can be there. Obviously, if somebody has a bed and breakfast, they're living there. So they obviously would be able to have their friends and family over. They'd be able to have a air conditioner repair person come in to work on something. But it says basically that with regard to a bed and breakfast, you could allow the number of guests to exceed the calculated number pursuant to a special event application. And the thought there was that if you had a bed and breakfast and somebody wanted to have a wedding, or somebody wanted to have a family reunion that would exceed the normal number, we would have a process whereby they could come in and ask for a special event application, which right now we only allow organizations to do. We don't allow individuals to come in for a special event application. And the thematic difference in our minds between the bed and breakfast and vacation rental on this point is the bed and breakfast is a special use. So before the bed and breakfast was ever approved as a bed and breakfast, this issue would be brought up with the owner. Is it your intention to have weddings or events, things like this? So it would be vetted at the very start. But that is different than what is in the vacation rental. So I point that out to see what you think about it.
It gets to the same place that I'm trying to get to. So, you know, I don't object. I just think it's a little bit more than we need in the ordinance. In other words, if we didn't have that in there and someone wanted to do a vacation rental / bed and breakfast where they had multiple unrelated guests or they had an event, they have to ask for a special use. And if we're going to allow bed and breakfast to have a special event, then why not a vacation rental? I don't get allowing that.
Occupied. The point of the point of the bed and breakfast is, one, it is a special use.
Yeah, okay,
So
that's fine. We don't need to dwell on that because you're right, if it's a special use, it's.
Okay, so anything else on this matter, and we'll bring back another draft.
I think one thing I want to emphasize, and we probably should signal to the community, I am all for weddings in town and events in town. And if there's a residential neighborhood that welcomes that, I welcome that too. But this is a situation where the neighborhood existed, before the change in the use, and that makes it a little tougher. The burden of the proof is on the homeowner trying to introduce that type of a business. But like Trustee Pollock has brought up, I think we would welcome a discussion for a special use for some sort of event, wedding location, even in the residential area, assuming that neighbors were accepting of that.
And I think what really would matter there is the number. If a bed and breakfast is going to have 2 weddings a year or 3 weddings a year, that's a whole different thing than having the potential of having 60 events a year next door. So, okay, so let's move on then. Next up is, and I don't know if we want to combine these or, well, let's take them separately. Next will be a discussion regarding the installation of red light cameras. Chief Weitzel. Thank you, Director.
Good evening again. So I am coming before you to discuss and looking for direction on red light photo enforcement for the village. So how this really came about was I'm looking for a way to really change behavior. So me personally, the red light photo enforcement is about changing behaviors that leads to better driving habits. And yes, there can be revenue generated from this program. The reason I selected SafeSpeed to do a lot of the groundwork was I went to my neighbors, chiefs, and asked them who they used many months ago and if they were satisfied. The ones that I talked to all use SafeSpeed, our immediate neighbors in the area. So then I engaged them to do 2 studies. They did a data study first that was really collecting data from IDOT on crash information. And then some months later, they did a video surveillance, a 20-hour video surveillance at several intersections in Riverside. And those intersections included Ridgewood and First, 31st and 1st, 26th in Harlem, Ogden and Harlem, and 31st in Des Plaines. The current state statute only allows red light photo enforcement on state roadways. You cannot put them on your local municipality, or my understanding is you cannot even put them on county roadways. So 31st in Des Plaines was out, but they did the survey for us anyways, and it didn't have the violations. And Harlem and Ogden is already under red light photo enforcement on the Berwyn side, but it was shut off for a long period of time. So when the construction was being done at Harlem and Ogden, by state statute, you can't have the red light camera running. And then when that intersection is reintroduced again, and that's the word that IDOT uses, to full capacity, there has to be a time period, a learning period again for those red light cameras to be turned on. And there is a prohibition about putting more red light cameras in. Not that it couldn't happen eventually, but there's a period that you cannot put additional, even in another municipality by IDOT rules. So when they did their study for us, they found intersections that are feasible. And I gotta clarify what feasible is for you. So that doesn't actually mean that if this board chooses to go ahead with the program, that those intersections would be granted by IDOT. IDOT is the final authority. So what happens is, if the feasibility, the process would be, if this board chooses in any capacity to go forward with any vendor, it's the same for any vendor we would choose. We have to make a packet to IDOT. And a lot of that is safe speeds information, our own local data, our own crash data, and one of the most important pieces that has to go with there is a letter from the police chief justifying the cameras. And the reason that is sometimes the municipality might have somewhere that they think a camera should be put in for other reasons besides traffic volume and violations. A good example of that would be Riverside Brookfield High School at First and Ridgewood and Forest. Although they say that it's feasible, if it hadn't been feasible and this board felt that it was an overwhelming public safety issue, we could still present a case. IDOT would still review it, and they would still be the final decision maker. But feasibility doesn't automatically mean we get the camera. It means there's a great likelihood that we can, but it's still a process that has to happen. It's still a much legwork that would need to be done between any action the board takes and final installation, for a lack of a better word. So, the red light camera in photo enforcement, I view is reducing, we can put our manpower other places, and I would say that about First and Ridgewood and Forest. Because I can't put a police car at 31st and First. I can't put a police car at 26th and Harlem. There's no safe place for my officers to sit and monitor red light violations. They would have to park illegally themselves, and I don't think it serves a purpose for us to have an officer there. It's a safety hazard for the officer, and it really doesn't serve that purpose. Now, if you read the survey report, you see that there's quite a lot of violations in a 24-hour period. Some of those are straight-through violations. A good many of them are turn-on-right violations. Safe Speed noted to me personally when we met that there's the new bike path at 31st and First, which would be a reason to note in any application process we make to IDOT that there is a new path for both pedestrians and bicyclists that dumps right into that corner, which is ours. So eastbound 31st at First Avenue is under the village's jurisdiction. They have a program. I must say no Safe Speed, I'll speak for them, client bought the product outright. You could go there and buy the red light photo enforcement program yourself. It's over $500,000. No municipality has ever done that. They all used a turnkey process, and it's worked out well for their current clients. Now, how their program works, it's so the $100 fine, and Riverside gets out of the fine, I'll speak to the financial aspect, out of the fine, we get 60, they get 40. It's some companies used to use a percentage base, but then the state statute was changed. And our violations, well, some municipalities, if you see in some of their paperwork, have a lot more violations than we do, such as the intersection of Harlem and Cermak, very, very heavy. Some of the intersections near the Eisenhower Expressway, municipalities that have red light cameras of cars that enter 290 have much higher volume than you would see in our community. That's based on how many violations actually count. And what I say by that is this is how it works. So Safe Seed sends us a batch. And in that batch might be 300 videos from a 3-day period. That's because they went past the stop bar, or they blew the light, outright. Those are then reviewed by either a current police officer or a retired police officer. Safe Speed makes no judgment on that. They send the batch. That officer watches the batch and goes by our community standards, especially on whether they stop at the stop bar and make the right turn on right. And I say that because there are some communities that say, Chief, their elected officials tell them, Chief, we want no citations issued to any car that stops for 3 seconds and then makes the turn. There's communities that say our community standard is 2 seconds. So that is up to us. The state statute says you just have to come to a stop at the stop bar, the painting. The state statute does not tell you how long you have to come to that stop. That's something that we would develop. And they told us there are many communities that have different standards. That is factual. So that's, and I came to the dollar amounts. So if I took say they sent us 100 videos on a Monday, maybe only 15 meet the requirements that we want. Because we want to make sure we're not overzealous, right? So we have a 2-second or a 3-second stop. They train our officers down at their facility in Chicago, as does all red light photo enforcement companies. You go down there, you're trained on their software, you're trained on how to review the videos, you're trained on how to get the videos, and you're trained on the equipment that they produce for us back here, and then the equipment that would be at the hearings. And out of those 100, maybe only 15 meet our requirement. So Riverside for that day would have 15 red light photo enforcement tickets. That's $100. If you took our cut, you multiply that by 30 days in a month, you're talking $24,000 to $27,000 that the village gets deposited. Now, when this became public, there were people that came, when this agenda was posted online, I've already had people call my office and say, that's a lot of money. So I went over to the court system. I drove over to Maybrook and I went to the clerk's office. And if you get a speeding ticket in Cook County or a red light ticket or a no turn on red, typically a judge will fine an individual between $95 and $180 for a violation. And if it's not a supervision, it goes against your record. If it is a supervision, it does not. But there's $137 in fees on every ticket. So most people can walk out of that Maybrook courthouse with a $250 to $300 citation for the same violation. Because the fees are mandatory. Judges are not allowed to waive the fees. They could waive the fine altogether. So they could say, you know what, the fees are too much. I'm only going to fine you $137 because I don't believe that the 120 I'd fine you too. So judges are allowed to do that. They're not allowed to waive the fees. But typically, going to court is much more expensive for a motorist. It's certainly much more expensive for the village. It's officers in court at time and a half, at a minimum of 3.5 hours every time our officers go to traffic court. So there is significant savings in our officers sitting in courtroom for what are considered minor traffic violations. And I would also note that I had a resident say, well, they don't like the fact that the video would be invasion. I actually think it's more an invasion when an officer stops you. Now, take, for example, you make a traffic stop out on the street, officer comes up, he has a conversation with the motorist, he checks their driver's license to see if it's valid, he checks whether they have any outstanding warrants. You can see into the motorist's car while you're standing at their door. None of that happens during red light photo enforcement. I think it's a less invasive process. They taking pictures of the front of the car and the license plate. They don't capture pictures of the driver. So, I mean, that's my opinion on the invasiveness of red light, of a resident that expressed that they thought it was an invasion of privacy. And I reminded them that it's on the public way, although they didn't buy into that argument. But as we all know, the Supreme Court says the cameras are okay, including the next item we have for the street cameras, as long as they're pointed on the public way. So, and there is, I put in my memo to the board, there is absolutely, positively a negative view of some public have a negative view of red light photo enforcement, no question. But I think the data is building that it is a positive tool for law enforcement. I believe it'd be better used resources. And there is data on both sides. So you can even go onto the internet and search red light photo enforcement reports. And you will find reports that say that it reduces accident, it reduces right turn on red. There are some, you'll find other reports that say it doesn't. Kind of depends on what community it's researching, what data it's researching, but it is absolutely data on both sides. There's no question to that. I found that myself when I did my research. So I do believe it's a very, I mean, to me, all traffic enforcement is about changing habits. Even the officers' regular stops they do. And there's always a fine associated with every traffic stop. There's a fine with parking tickets. If we stop somebody on the street and give them even a compliance ticket for having one headlight, it's a $50 fine. The speeding tickets, I say, can go to $250 to $300. So there's never a time that a citation is being issued that there isn't some fine attached to encourage the reduction of that repetitive behavior and encourage better behavior or more safe practices. So I have no affiliation at all with Safe Speed. I wanted the board to know that I selected them to do this preliminary work because I talked to Westchester, North Riverside, River Forest, and Berwyn, who used them. Their chiefs were very pleased with their behavior, their training, their accessibility. They lived up to their contract, and they provided continuing assistance. Now, one clarification I want to make on hiring a part-time officer or a current officer. Some municipalities, like Westchester, sometimes their officer that reviews the videos only works 4 to 6 hours a week because they don't have that big a batch. There's been times that the Berwyn has worked 20 to 25 hours a week watching videos. So they usually all put a cap on it. If you're hiring a retired officer, you will work no more than this amount. It's a part-time position, no benefits. And sometimes it can be much lower. I could not see our community going that high, those other volumes, but the salary that would go with somebody to review it if it was a retired officer, could be as low as 4 to 6. The police chief in River Forest said their person that reviews their videos is a retired Elmwood Park police officer, and he sometimes works between 6 to 10 hours a week, and that's it because of the amount of violations that they have. And that's really what it's based on. It's based on the batches that they send you, and you can set it up. So if Riverside wanted to receive its batches every 3 days, then that's what they'll send us. If we want to receive our batches every day, then that's what they send us. And they have training on all the, not ticketing funerals, emergency vehicles, because sometimes you'll get 100 violations in a row. That's almost always, they tell me, a funeral. But that's why the officers have to watch the video and decide what is a violation and what not is a violation. So I can answer any questions the board may have. I will say the First Avenue in Ridgewood. Right now, we could not go with that tomorrow if we wanted to. We couldn't do the program tomorrow. Implementation, if this board wants to go forward, would be at least a year down the road. We have to get approval from IDOT, have to attend their meetings, have to present our case, have to have permitting through IDOT, then there has to be a test period. So it's not a short process. But First and Forest in Ridgewood has to be turned back into its original. The construction has to be complete. IDOT has to come out and certify that it's complete. Then we could make an application for First Avenue and Forest or Ridgewood. The other ones, we could move forward on if the board decides to move forward.
Am I correct, though, that Safe Speed has intimated to you that they think that the First and Ridgewood Forest intersection would be a feasible intersection once it's back up and running?
They think it's feasible, and they also said that they think when we met with them, that they told the manager and I that a strong endorsement from the police chief with a school with 1,800 students, plus Hollywood School, plus pedestrians that travel there, plus these recent accidents that have happened there, would make a compelling case, they believe. They never guarantee it, but that they believe that that would be a compelling case.
Chief, if a crime happens in downtown Riverside and the perpetrator flees through a red light camera, but actually stops at the sign and does everything legal as he leaves, are those cameras on all the time, so that video can be reviewed to help solve crimes?
Yes, they stream, so they are on all the time, and they don't take photos all the time, like still photos. But yes, and they're high high density. I've seen the photos that we've used when we've grabbed photos from either the Berwyn side or North Riverside at Harlem and Cermak on crimes that have been committed by us. And they're very good photos. And the way that works is maybe we're looking for a red Chevy 4-door that fled at 2 o'clock in the morning, and we know it fled northbound. Well, then we're going to go at 1:40, ask for the video from 1:45 to maybe 2:20, and look for the red 4-door Chevy that goes northbound, even obeying the traffic laws. Then we can get a lead and get a license plate and get a lead. And that's happened numerous times.
So the two questions are, one, would you like the village to move forward with this process? And if the answer to that is yes, are you interested in getting other companies to provide information and bids, or are you all right with us moving forward with SafeSpeed?
I guess I'll kick off. I definitely want to move forward. I wish we would have done this years ago. And as far as bids, I normally would tend toward competitive bids, but I'm not sure the 7 of us or staff are going to provide a better decision than Chief Weitzel's close personal relationships with surrounding communities that have actual hands-on experience with them. So I would be fine moving forward with the vendor that Chief Weitzel has suggested.
Other comments?
I agree.
I agree.
Mr. Pollard?
I have some questions, and I think I'm okay for now going forward. There was a reference in your summary, Chief Weitzel, to a study by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety.
Yes.
I'd like to see more of that, to review that in some more depth.
Did I include that in the packet?
I didn't see
Yeah, it was in
that.
It is?
I saw a reference to it.
No, it's in there.
You know what, I'll email it to you, but
I'm
I will
sorry.
email that to you.
I'm sorry, I missed that. I didn't, my other issue is I would want to see this as part of a total camera security system in the village, not just red light cameras. And that, to me, the security cameras throughout the village are very important. If some of them happen to also do red lights, that's fine too. But I would want to at least have a comprehensive plan to implement a village-wide security surveillance camera system. And then as far as competitive bidding, I will not support this if there's not competitive bidding. We owe it to ourselves and our taxpayers to see if there's other companies out there that can provide a better price or a better product.
I have a question on that. Because I agree with Trustee Sedeby that I don't think we're going to get better information from our staff than you got. Yeah. Can they use the same data that's been provided from SafeSpeed to provide their competitive bidding?
No.
Or do they each
So-
need to go out there for 30 days and do the same thing?
So if we were the process would be, we would do an RFP, and anybody that put in for the RFP would have to come do their own study because they need their own data. So they would go and do the IDOT study, and then they'd have to do a 24-hour surveillance study like they did. That would have to be good, and then we'd have to come back to the board with, well, we'd have to, once we select, we have to come back out of that RFP and say, well, this is the company we're going to go with. If it wasn't SafeSpeed, they'd have to do the same thing SafeSpeed did, and then come back to the board. Because they won't use SafeSpeed's not going to give them their data. Even though this is public, that company's going to want their own data to make their pitch.
How many companies are there?
I know of 4, I mean, there's several. There's Red Speed, Red Flex, there's Safe Speed.
I don't know how many are local, I know Safe Speed is local, but I know that there are a few other companies that are out there.
Is there a standard, is it standard pricing? I mean, do they post their pricing? You know, it seems like Safe Speed is pretty much 60/40, right? I mean, is that how the other companies are?
You know, I don't know if that's how they are. I can't speak to that. I've never seen them post publicly what theirs are. I can't say what it would be. There is so in the Safe Speed, I had a question earlier today. Their contract, so if this board enters into a contract ultimately with them, if we want out of that contract for any reason because we're not happy in the first year, so there's a $50,000 penalty because they put in the capital. One day after a year, it's 60 days notice and no penalty. So at 14 months, if we didn't like the program, we'd have to give them 60 days certified letter notice. The program is ceased and we're out no money. 1 year and under, it's a $50,000 penalty.
Mr. Powell?
Well, as you say, I know that there are vendors and villages that go with a flat fee, not a percentage of the revenue. And I would like that considered if and when we do an RFP.
Trustee Peters, do you have comments?
I agree with deferring to Chief Weitzel's selection of the vendor. With regard to the overall program, I'm still sort of parsing through all those facts that are on both sides, as you guys talked about. There's a lot of stigma out there with regard to these systems, and it sounds like there's been additional measures taken to try to alleviate some of the stigma out there and make it a little bit more credible. So I really just need a little more time to think about whether this program is right for us. But if that's what we choose, I 100% defer to Chief Weitzel's selection of the vendor.
Well, so, yes.
Yeah, I want to clarify something. Is the village staff recommending we go with Safe Speed, or is that just a company that is local and you had contact with them and you gathered information from them?
They've been utilized by other communities. They've worked well within these other communities. I haven't, and Chief Weitzel can speak to this as well, I haven't talked to other managers that have had experiences necessarily with other red light camera companies. So given the experience that other communities have had, that's why we initially engaged Safe Speed to begin with.
The reason I wanted to clarify that is because I agree with what Trustee Peters said and what Trustee Sedevi said. I'll defer to Chief Weitzel as well, but I want him to have multiple picks, multiple vendors to choose from.
And so to the point of whether or not we want to engage in this pretty quickly, for us to do a process, staff is probably overwhelmed with the projects that we're doing right now. So to add on an RFP to conduct that process, it probably would not come back to the board for a few months.
I would have no problem hiring a consultant to do that RFP process. I think it's worth it.
I'm sorry, Chief, to answer Doug's question, are you recommending Safe Speed based on the conversations you've had with surrounding communities?
I was recommending Safe Speed because when I first went out, they're the ones, I personally met with the chiefs.
Right.
So they're the ones that recommended them. And I went, before I ever contacted Safe Speed, I contacted all the chiefs first. And then I reached out to Safe Speed and contacted them. And I've been happy, I have to say, I've been happy with their response, their program, what the other chiefs have told me about them. I haven't looked at other vendors, but I am recommending them based on the dealings that I've had with them thus far. They've been very responsive. Their program seems to be fair to me. They even developed a new second tier system. So, and I mean that so the officer gives a ticket, right? Sends a ticket. and you can view it on the internet, or we can get a kiosk in our police station, and they come to the adjudication hearing. If that's still not, the violator can meet with that officer in person. So you can come and say, you know what, who's the officer that approved this ticket on this? Okay, it's this officer. They have a process where you can sit down, and that violator can make their case face to face with our officer that issues that ticket. So to me, that was impressive. Not all of the companies offer that. So I am recommending them based on that. But I realize this is a policy and board decision, but I am a strong proponent of safe speed from what I know thus far and from what I've been told by surrounding police chiefs.
So yes, please.
What's your familiarity with other firms?
I don't have familiarity with other firms besides what I read in like on the internet when I search their companies or something. I've had no personal contact with any other red light photo enforcement company.
What I would suggest then, Chief, is I would be fine with Chief going again back to the surrounding police chiefs for the surrounding communities and inquire, did they competitive bid? Do they have other, maybe we can gain some knowledge both for vendors and responses they got. Some may be dated, some may be current, but with that, I'm still comfortable leaving the decision in Chief Weitzel's hand on picking a vendor.
I would add to that, talk to some villages that use other vendors.
Right. Okay, I can do that.
Right.
More importantly, because we know safe speed. We know, based on what Chief Weitzel said, we know they can provide the service, and we like the service they can provide, but we don't know.
Trustee Clark, would you be satisfied with what Trustee said if he just articulated, or would you prefer the formal RFP?
This may be the most significant thing that we do as a board, and I've been on the board for 5 years, and there's been some big issues, but this is a pretty major one. I just can't imagine just joining with one vendor. I mean, it's just common public policy to do competitive bidding. I mean, I know we legally can probably waive the competitive bidding and all that, but I just don't see a reason why we wouldn't do it. I understand that it may cause a delay, but we're about to jump into a $500 million project here. And we're just going to jump head first with the first vendor we happen to come across. I don't see that as good public policy.
I guess though, from a piece of paper bid, how's that going to change your mind?
They may be cheaper. They may provide the same exact services for less cost.
Cheaper's not always better.
Well, no, it's not always better, but if they're providing the same exact service at a cheaper price, it is better.
Well, but we don't know the technology and the interaction. But I think that can be accomplished through Chief Weitzel's conversions.
Could you speak to other police chiefs that are using other vendors?
Yes, I would go to I go to our West Suburban Police Chiefs Association. We have an email system, and I'll ask for chiefs that use other systems, and I will
rank them for us.
And I will meet with them and ask them, about are they satisfied? What company do they use? Are they satisfied? What is Trustee Pollock said, what is the financial split that happens there? I can compile that data.
So why don't we do this? It sounds like there is a general consensus to move forward with the concept. Why don't we have Chief Weitzel do that first level of review, come back and report to us what he's been able to find out. I have to say, I tend to agree with Trustee Pollock that of something of this magnitude, that I do think it would be worth a formal RFP procedure, and if we had to get a consultant as a staff to prepare that, given the overall dollars we're talking about, that makes sense to me, just from a public policy standpoint. But let's let Chief Weitzel go out and see what he can find, and we'll put this on. Trustee Peters, do you think by our next meeting you would be in a position to make a decision one way or the other about moving forward?
Yeah, I'm going to parse through these 700 pages. So, yeah, my plan is to be ready by the next meeting.
Oh, and I was just told that Chief Weitzel,
I might have to push it a little, so I'm leaving on vacation for a week.
That's
So
okay.
I'll have like a week then to prepare it when I get back for the 16th, but I could probably get it done by the first board meeting in September.
Let's do that. We'll first board meeting in September. That's fine. Okay.
Could
So-
I ask though, because the public probably isn't reading through our packet, what was the estimate of the initial capital outlay to the village per camera?
So
Because we
what-
talked, Trustee Pollock threw out a big number that I don't think is anywhere near.
You mean what Safe Speed would put out?
No, what would the cost of the village be per camera to implement this?
So it would be, you saw that there's a line in there that says that it's $2,000 per month, but that was only saying that we had 4 cameras. So if we had 3, it's $1,500. It would be, 2 would be $1,000, and that's based on $100 for the installation, $100 for video footage, processing, printing and mailing, the violations and adjudication support, because they provide somebody at our adjudication hearings for any tickets that would be contested, and a hearing officer would want information on how the video's captured, what the technicality is if somebody is contesting it. So they're picking that up. We would have to pay, it'd be $500 a month per camera.
So $6,000 a year. Well, we don't pay for the cameras. We're leasing them.
That's correct, we are leasing them.
I wasn't referring to our costs, I was referring to the overall money involved in this project. And from what I'm hearing others say, this could be $500,000 of revenue or something like that. So I was just referring to the overall scope and magnitude of the project. I know our costs are minimal up front and ongoing.
Okay, so while we're on the subject, let's just move on then into the Trustee Pollock's other point with regard to the discussion regarding the public camera surveillance system. Chief Weiser.
Yes, so I wanted the board to first know that I probably looked at this according to these memos that back in 2014 when Trustee Pollock, I actually visited Burr Ridge back in 2014 and 2015 and spoke to their chief, John Madden, back then at their successful program. You can see some of these memos still have the village manager as a finance director, so that shows you how old they are. So I then went and visited recently Elmhurst, Hotchkiss, and River Forest because Hotchkiss has a camera system that's not as sophisticated, but it does the job. And Elmhurst and River Forest have very robust systems. And I believe that when I visited River Forest, their system is very robust and very well run, and they have very good policies that go along with the way they monitor their system. So in my write-up, they did a deeper dive into River Forest's system. And I say that because in 2000, they did it right, in my opinion, and this is the way I would do it for this. I would like to institute it if the board chooses. In 2009, River Forest put $350,000 aside, not to spend in 2009. They didn't spend $350,000 in 2009. They started their camera program. So they have 9, I think, pan, tilt, zoom video cameras now and 37 fixed cameras. So when River Forest started, they started around the Harlem Avenue corridor and their Lake Street business corridor and Chicago Avenue. And they started slow. We put in 3 or 4 cameras, see how that worked. And then when they were satisfied with that, they moved on. Each year they would build upon it in some capacity. And in fact, they plan on putting as many as another 30 cameras in over the next couple of years. They budgeted another $80,000. So their system is available to their officers in the police station, at the 911 center, on their squad cars, detectives have it on their telephone at River Forest. Public Works Director has it on in his office monitor and his phone for weather conditions, and they give it to the fire department command staff on their telephones so they can call it up for emergency situations. River Forest has solved over 100 crimes since 2009 using the cameras. They range from retail theft to robberies to purse snatchings to carjackings to simple bike thefts. It's been very successful. And in addition to that, they They didn't plan on using it for weather, but they found out it worked great for their public works department to monitor the streets during heavy snow. So that was an outlay that they didn't take into consideration, but they're very happy with. But River Forest program, they have very strict guidelines. They keep their video 30 days. If you don't flag it, it's gone. It doesn't matter. So if you come back 90 days later and need it for an armed robbery, it's too bad. You better flag the video for use. That's the way they keep their system, I think, ethical, and it's the way they make sure there's no abuses involved in that. So, and Chief Jim O'Shea said there's been no problems with the 30-day storage. It's not been an issue for them. They haven't missed a big case because they didn't have the video. That has never occurred for them. So they have, and then their community really supported it. So I asked Chief O'Shea when you presented this, and he said, well, I wasn't the chief in 2009, but I was deputy chief. So I was at the meetings. I said, well, did you have pushback? And he said, no, absolutely no, because they started on Harlem Avenue at the entrances, and then they moved to their business district, which made sense for them. And now they're going to even be moving it to Madison Avenue because they're building business districts along the border with Forest Park on Madison Avenue. So one thing he told me is that two things that are really, really important is you have to have the server capacity and you must have IT support. He said they underestimated the amount of money that they needed for the IT support. They currently have the same contract company we do for IT support. He said it's essential for the program to run. And they also release reports to their board. So while not getting into details, twice a year, the chief released a report that says, my agency, the River Forest Police Department, viewed 70 videos. Out of those 70 videos we used in crime, we made 46 arrests, or we identified so many people, and they show that it works, and they don't go into specifics on people's names and stuff, but he prepares a report so that they know that they're getting their use out of that system. If they get another 30 cameras in the next couple of years, you're talking about over 60 cameras, and they said their village has been very supportive of that. They did partner with several private businesses off of Harlem and Lake to put them on the corners of their business. In River Forest at Harlem and Lake, there's like a Starbucks and I think a Men's Warehouse, and there's some other business. So they partnered with them to put those bubble cameras. They're fixed. They put them on there, and not only does it monitor the traffic, it monitors criminal activity. Chief O'Shea also said that they've solved numerous hit-and-run auto accidents and pedestrians that have been struck by cars at that busy intersection from that same camera system, that one at Harlem and Lake Street.
Chief, when you say they partnered with the business, did they partner in a financial way? Or
No.
just in using the businesses?
No, they paid it all. They went to the business and said, we'd like to put this camera up on your facade, your facility. You know, they had to work some legal stuff out, but the Village of River Forest will pay all the expenses with that, and they were able to do that. So another thing they said that he thinks Riverside may have a little difficulty with that River Forest doesn't is all the cameras in River Forest, they have electric lights. They don't have gas lights. So they're very easy to put them along the district in the business district. Ours might be a little bit different. We'd have to kind of make sure, because even the electric lights in our business district, they're low. So they hang those cameras there. It has to be a little bit higher than that. So that would be a good opportunity to partner with our businesses, I think, in the downtown area. But they had no problem because currently all their cameras are hooked up to electrical lights or poles. And when he asked me about our community, I told him about the gas lights. He said, "Yeah, that won't work." So, but it would work along, Harlem Avenue, and you could also put a freestanding. If we can get electric to it, you could put a pole in, And I suppose we could look at if it goes forward in the future, maybe poles that are more aesthetically pleasing than just a standard metal pole that's up in the air a certain amount of feet. But those are all details that could be worked out. I do like his suggestion of starting, this is the project he said to piecemeal, to start at a certain amount and then build it out.
And I think with your guidance, we pretty much know where we would want to start, right?
And I want the board to know I took it out of the 2019 capital budget because I was well aware that we have some financial constraints. So I actually pushed it till 2020. That's why you didn't see it. If you've seen the draft capital budget, it was taken out of mine. So I really am looking to see if I should put it back into the capital budget or just keep it at the 2020 level and discuss it back.
That's a good question. I mean, I thought it was interesting that Trustee Pollock really tied this in with the red lights in terms of having kind of a comprehensive approach, and also that would make a big difference in terms of having the revenue to pay for these cameras. So what is your guidance to Chief Weitzel on his question?
Well, if that's the thought process, then it would be probably 2020. We
Right.
wouldn't see any revenue from the red lights till 2020.
Well, I would suggest we put the capital in 19 and we could reimburse that capital through future revenue from the red lights.
Especially if we want to start small.
Yes.
And start with
I
just
wouldn't
few
wait a
cameras.
year for this.
Jessica?
Well, there will be some tough discussions that need to be had because we've utilized a lot of our unassigned fund balance for all of our capital initiatives over the past several years. So, limited resources to utilize for capital in 2019. So that'll be part of the more global discussion that the board will have at an upcoming meeting. There is money that we've held on to at IRMA that's accruing interest that has somewhat been an initiative of we just keep it there. So those are funds that are available for capital essentially, but that is not noted as our unassigned fund balance.
My view is these cameras in solving one crime pay for themselves. I mean, we've got police officers using doorbell cameras and going door to door. I mean, it's insane. So money's fungible. I believe we can find the capital for this, and there is a source to replenish that initial outlay, I believe, through the red light cameras. I would not put this out
How much
for.
did you have in originally?
I had 130,000, and that was based on discussions we had in 2014 and 2015. I know the manager doesn't like the word placeholder, but that's what it was put there as back then. So, I mean, I could go, it could be less. Maybe if we only started with 2 or 3 cameras, maybe it wouldn't be that much. Maybe it would come in somewhere under that. So, I'm not saying we have to expend, like we say, maybe we find 2 or 3 locations to put them in and see how much that costs and work from there up.
That seems to me a more sensible.
I think you should put it in, and then we should have the tough decision.
That's what I would say. Is everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Trustee Peters?
I agree. My question, I guess we can talk about another time. I know Brookfield had a grant program that they used, and
Yeah.
maybe you were speaking about that earlier.
Yeah, I will actually seek grants, so I will not only talk to our grant writer, Todd, I will also look into the ComEd. Now, it's over for this year, but we will make that application, if that grant becomes available after September for 2019, I'll make that application for that.
Okay, sounds like we're in agreement. Yes?
Thank you.
Thank you for all the hard work on this. We really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
We really do. We have no new business. There is no need for an executive. Did you have something?
No.
No. There's no need for an executive session, so I'd ask for a motion second to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
By Mr. Pollock.
So moved.
Second. What he said. Second by Mr. Valerie. Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Giza. Trustee Ballerine.
Aye.
Trustee Sudovy.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you. Good night. Thank you, Trustee Peters, for joining us.